We all know that ETS2 can be played in many different ways, and if back in 2012 it was merely the start of something promising, today this little game from the Czech Republic sits at the very top of the truck sim genre. Looking back, it's hard to describe just how massive its success was, but one thing is certain: when something is that good early on, there's only one way to make it even better: multiplayer. And if in 2026 multiplayer can be a polished and enjoyable experience, let me tell you, it wasn't always like this. The game released as a single-player experience, so for the better part of its early days, it was just you, your truck, and a pretty big map ready to be explored. And as you'd imagine, it wasn't long until a huge desire to share that experience with others started to unfold. Trucking can be a lonely job, but ETS2 was never meant to feel that way. The desire was quickly recognized, and in May of 2014, Truckers MP launched, answering our prayers, bringing virtual truckers online for the very first time. And what followed was history. People from all over the world started driving together, slowly shaping what Truckers MP is today. A platform that gathered around 6 million players just by simply making it possible for them to drive together. For many of us, although it was nothing like what we have today in terms of DLCs, graphics and features, those were the golden days of ETS2. And for all the good it did us, and while Truckers MP did solve the biggest problem at a time, it never really managed to fill all the gaps. And the three main issues it couldn't fully cover came back to take a big part of its player base later on. To better understand why, you have to look at how ETS2 itself was evolving. The game was growing fast, and that growth was heavily accelerated by mods. Players suddenly had the ability to completely transform their experience, from better graphics and better physics to entire map expansions that were constantly being released, many of which left the official content seem almost bland. And before long, many of the early players who initially fell in love with the base game were starting to call it almost unplayable without them. At the same time, official content from SCS was much slower to arrive back in the day, which meant mods became more than a cool addition. They were actually filling in a real gap in the game's progress. Naturally, more and more players started going back to single player, which supported these mods. Truckers MP was slowly turning into something that you would only start visiting every now and then, rather than the place you would spend most of your time in. And as mods kept evolving, the idea of playing without them became harder and harder to justify. Pair that with a period where the word chaos was honestly an underwhelming way to describe the multiplayer experience, and you can start seeing how this unfolded. Truckers MP had three major flaws. It had no traffic, it allowed no mods, and it had a massive map that felt empty unless you were always driving between the same route, Calais and Duisburg. And all of that exposed the gap in how players actually wanted to experience this game in a multiplayer format. And because where there is opportunity, there will always be takers, that gap didn't go unnoticed, and in 2021, scssoftware introduced something that would quickly change the scenery: an official multiplayer module called the Convoy mode. For the very first time, multiplayer promised to be more than putting players together on the same map. It actually focused on actually sharing the full experience. You could finally choose who you'll be playing with, in a format that still felt like an enhanced version of ETS2. The AI traffic was available, and because of that, the roads felt alive. And most importantly, mods were no longer left behind. All of those things that made single player so immersive by using third-party plugins and mods, the graphics, the physics, custom maps, could now be experienced in a multiplayer format as well. And while Convoy mode wasn't really designed to compete with the scale of Truckers MP, since it only allowed a session of maximum 8 players, it didn't really have to, because what it offered instead made it up for the lost hundreds of players that crashed into you at every corner. A smaller but more personal experience where every player actually mattered. And yet, even then, as good as Convoy mode was, it came with a few major limitations. Someone had to host the session, so the server will only exist as long as that one person was online, and if a friend, or the one hosting the session, had a small internet issue, your session would end rather quickly. Performance could also vary depending on your system, and when you started playing with people from different countries, things like ping and stability became slightly annoying. But that's when dedicated servers came in, and I'm happy to announce that this part of the video is sponsored by acerohosting.com, and what they've done is make something that used to be complicated incredibly simple and accessible. For $6 a month, you can run your own ETS2 server with up to 8 players. It will always be running and everyone will connect to the same stable environment, no matter where they're playing from. Their interface is what actually made me interested in this collab, because it introduces something that in my opinion is a game changer. As a server owner, you can create different server presets with completely different modded configurations, which means that you can switch between the experience in seconds. One moment you can be running a clean vanilla session with your casual friends and community. The next one you can load a heavily modded preset that takes you from vanilla ETS2 to a standalone map like RPM or Grand Utopia in just a few clicks. And instead of constantly reconfiguring everything every time you want to switch up, it's all saved and ready to go. Besides that cool feature, the interface itself is also very straightforward, and it gives you a solid range of controls over how your server behaves. And I have to say, when I was testing this server, it genuinely brought me back to those early multiplayer days, only this time everything felt a bit different, because I had better graphics, I had my favorite mods and a stable experience. And also, of course, a group of people that actually loved sharing the same world. And I want to thank those guys over to Assetto Hosting for making this possible for our community, because this is in many ways what multiplayer in ETS2 was always meant to become. And if you want to create your own custom server and shape that experience exactly the way you want it, I'll have a link in the description. So the next time you fire up ETS2, you might choose to do it alone, you might choose to do it with total strangers or Truckers MP, or you might do it on your own server, because at this point, the multiplayer experience is whatever you want it to be. Maybe that's what makes ETS2 so special after all. And as always, until the next time, stay safe on the road and keep on trucking. Cheers!